Hi there. It's March the 31st, and we continue our journey through Torah in the book of Deuteronomy, in Hebrew Devarim, meaning the words spoken by Moses to the people of Israel. We're in chapters 16 and 17 today. Chapter 16 opens and deals with the festivals of the people of Israel. It starts off with the festival of Passover, Pesach, which is to be celebrated in this part in the month of Aviv. Now, obviously, Aviv is different to the month Nisan, which is used in other places, but Aviv is about spring. Aviv is about the new coming out of the ears of corn. It's when things are green. It's used in the name of one of the famous Israeli cities today, Tel Aviv, the hill of spring. So it's an interchangeable word for the month of Nisan. And in the month of Aviv, in the month of Nisan, the Passover, the Pesach is to be celebrated, but also the 7 days of Matzot, the 7 days of unleavened bread. And therefore the festival is also known in Hebrew as Hag Matzot, the festival of unleavened bread. And then there's a counting off from that of 49 days, and on the 50th day, or on the seventh week, if you like, it's 7 days of 7, and therefore the Feast of Weeks happens. We call Pentecost, but the Feast of Weeks comes on the 50th day, Shavuot. So that's the Hag Shavuot. And then in the autumn time, there comes the autumn festival of Sukkot, and Sukkot is the festival to remember the living in the wilderness, and therefore the people will live in booths for 7 days. And for these feasts, these three major feasts, all of the men of Israel are to come and appear before the Lord. It's a gathering of all the men of Israel to the Lord for those feasts. So that's about the feasts of Israel. Then comes the appointment of judges, shoftim in Hebrew, at the end of chapter 16, verse 18. And these shoftim are not just people who are there to punish people. They're actually, the word shofet in Hebrew means someone who puts things right, a right-wiser, someone who brings righteousness and someone who brings equity, pushes back chaos. So these judges are to be put in place to bring righteousness to bear in Israel. And then in chapter 17, the chapter starts off with a warning against bringing blemished sacrifices to the Lord, but also there's a very serious offence laid down of taking people away in idolatry, leading them after other gods or false gods, and that actually is an offence punishable under the law by death, because it's such a serious thing to be enticing Israel to ally to any other god apart from the one true God himself. And then in 17 verse 8 there's provision for judgments that are very difficult to decide to be referred to the priesthood. And the priests, the Levites, will be the final court of appeal in Israel. And actually, if they're not listened to, there are serious consequences, punishable by death, if their final word isn't adhered to, because this is seen as the final court, the place of last appeal. And then at the end of chapter 17, in verse 15 and onwards, there's a warning about the king who they may appoint. Obviously, eventually the people do come to appoint a king. God hasn't intended the people to have a king. That isn't his plan for them. But if, like the other nations around them, they say we want a king, which of course they do when it comes to Saul later on, the end of the judges period with Samuel, then the king is to not amass to himself treasures and particularly horses from Egypt, Egyptian horses, and is not to take many wives, particularly foreign wives who mislead his heart away from God. And also he's to have a copy of the law made, a copy of Torah made, that he keeps and refers to, and he's not to get above those fellow Israelites. He's not to become powerful and the center of attention. He is actually one of many. So it is foretelling something that's going to be coming along the line with the appointment of a king, with the calling of a king, with the anointing of a king. And of course we know that King Solomon, his downfall comes particularly because he amasses himself horses and wives and doesn't follow the laws of the Lord. It's so key that we remember that God is a God of righteousness. He's a God of right wising, because the right wising of God keeps back the chaos. It keeps back the evil that so often seeks to engulf us. The festivals as well are there to remember God's faithfulness. And so we have those three festivals, the Hag Matzot, Hag Shavuot, Hag Sukkot, the three festivals that remember God's faithfulness to his people Israel. Have a very good March 31st.